November of 2001, Afghanistan was dark. Nobody was out at night. The lights in the country were out. Any movement was pretty easily identifiable. We flew only at night as well. And the team called on the radio and they said, hey, we see some lights coming our way, can you take a look? So we see some lights, and it's a vehicle with their lights on driving towards their location. And I give the play-by-play. Just when we were going through our final checks inside the aircraft, ready to engage, it pulled into a compound in the middle of nowhere. So we held off. It was our decision on board the aircraft. I went back out on the radio and I said, hey, this vehicle just pulled into this small compound. Multiple vehicles, multiple adult males outside in this courtyard. He said, stand by, and he came back over the radio and said, there's a confirmed Taliban, you're cleared hot. So I can remember that moment, as I'm sitting in the aircraft. I look to my right, it's Lieutenant Colonel Mike Radford. He's the fire control officer. We're at this station. And I was like, game on. Allison Black, affectionately known by some as the Angel of Death. I grew up in Long Island, New York, and I wasn't surrounded by the military. West Point was not too far away. I knew a little bit about it. Upon graduating high school, I was looking to serve. I didn't know how that was going to manifest. I looked at all the branches of service, and the Air Force drew my attention. I wanted to be a part of something bigger than myself. I was looking for that sense of mission, sense of purpose, and I enlisted right out of high school, March the following year, March of '92. I didn't know many folks that were in the military, right? So when I joined the Air Force and went to basic training, I knew I was physically fit, but I didn't know how to march, how to salute. I was shocked that they were yelling at me. I was an 18-year-old young girl in search of that mission, but also being taught very directly how to carry myself as an airman. It was intimidating. There were many times, and I think this carried throughout my career, where you doubt. You doubt your path, you doubt your capability. Am I smart enough, strong enough, fast enough? Am I worthy of these roles? And that was no different in basic training. But then it became a challenge. I know how to fail, right? When I fail, I try to fail forward. Failure sucks. It's humbling, but I don't know how to say I quit. And the training and the people investing in me from the start of basic training to the time I hung up my cleats this year, that is what has carried me through. People believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. So it was during basic training that you were brought into a room to talk about specialized career fields. One was pararescue, combat control, SERE, EOD, explosive ordnance disposal. So they would come in and talk about these career fields and what it would take to do them. And that's where I learned about SERE. So I stayed behind and approached the SERE specialist and asked about it. I was terrified. I knew nothing about returning with honor. I knew nothing about survival or evasion, resistance, and escape. I grew up on Long Island, New York, suburbia. I knew nothing about being in the woods, surviving and cutting down trees and trapping animals. And it was the challenge that really drew me to that. I think I was pretty nervous that what if I couldn't do it? And I asked that question, well, what if I physically don't make it? What are you going to do with me? Are you going to kick me out? Because I want to stay in the Air Force. And that wasn't the case. So I think once I knew that I wasn't going to be kicked out of the Air Force if I didn't make it in SERE, that I would still have an opportunity to serve, I was willing to give it a try. And I think I am a testament to good training and patience of the instructors, because I didn't know what I was doing. But I also found teammates that were just like that. I had a teammate that was from Chicago, that grew up in the inner city, that didn't know anything about being in the field and learning those same skills. So that tight-knit unit of the team going through the initial SERE instructor training, which is 6 months long, that was defining, and those are friends for life. So I spent about 6.5 years. I was going to school at night, just taking a couple classes here and there just to better myself, not really knowing what Next life chapter was ahead. So 1998, I had applied and was accepted to go to officer training. So I left SERE and went to officer training school at Maxwell Air Force Base and had a slot to go to undergraduate navigator training. So when I commissioned and came to flying, to aviation, I knew I wanted to come to Air Force Special Ops because of the mission. I would have taken any airplane. My eye was on the AC-130 gunship, but I didn't want to get my hopes up. Because I knew nothing about flying. Just like I knew nothing about SERE when I found my way there, I knew nothing about aviation. I knew the grit and determination that it took, but I didn't know the skills, and that's another nod to the training. So I went to undergraduate navigator training at Pensacola Naval Air Station, and kind of fought and clawed my way back into Air Force Special Operations, into the gunship. And during that time, so I arrived at Hurlburt Field in AFSOC in 2000. And it was training. That was our focus. It was training hard, being really good at your job, and building my credibility. I had been in the military long enough to know how important your reputation and your credibility was. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to show up and I wanted to put up. I wanted to be chosen for the team if it was to come. And I think the atmosphere then was to try to get on joint exercises and any good training event with our joint teammates. So in AFSOC and Air Force Special Ops, specifically with the gunships, we would mission plan, we would train, we would execute the mission, we would debrief, hot wash, and then do it again. And that's where those relationships were built with our Navy SEAL partners, with our Green Berets, our Army Rangers, Air Force Special Tactics. We all trained together in hopes that when that call came, like, we were ready, and we knew we would be ready. What that call would be, we had no idea.
I just want to say, like, any 15-year-old who plays Call of Duty knows the AC-130,
That's
right?
right.
Like, it's the most famous it's like
Bring
one of the
the rain.
most famous pieces of military equipment. What drew you to it?
I knew I wanted to come to the AC-130 gunship for the intimate nature of the mission. At that time, the gunship was known for putting bullets where bombs couldn't go. Right, our bombs and our ammunition, our weapons have dramatically changed in the last couple of decades. So that intimate nature from the airplane to the ground in a troops in contact situation drew me. I wanted to be a part of protecting the guys on the ground. And that weapon system was a direct link to protecting the guys on the ground when they went to go do their mission. So the AC-130 gunship, if you start with a C-130, a cargo airplane, two propeller engines on either side, and then you give it to Air Force Special Ops, or you give it to USSOCOM, Special Operations Command, then you kit it out. And you kit it out with sensors, with big high fidelity cameras, so you can see with certainty. You can positively identify the target individual. You can identify the friendly forces, right? So high fidelity cameras, and you slap a couple weapons on it. So back then, in 2001, the AC-130H Spectre gunship had a 105 howitzer cannon. That's a field artillery piece, right? So in Vietnam, the monster garage back then took a field artillery piece and slapped it on inside the aircraft, sticking out the left side, to put bullets where bombs couldn't go along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Now, if you can imagine this field artillery piece on hydraulics inside the aircraft, hand loaded by our gunners, so taking one round out of a time out of the ammunition rack and loading it. Then you add a 40 millimeter Bofors cannon. So that's on board, and that is a 4-round clip that they would also hand load, also on the left-hand side of the aircraft. So this C-130 aircraft with 2 big guns loaded inside, pointing out the left side, and now this aircraft flies left-hand circles. So we can train our weapons on the enemy in protection of the friendly forces. So she's big, she's slow, she's gritty, but she's pretty darn effective. During my time in the gunship, and it's changed over time, but then we carried a 13-man crew. Sometimes we would carry 14 men. So you had your pilot, your co-pilot, you had a flight engineer, you had a navigator, you had a fire control officer, all on the flight deck of this specific airplane. In the back, you had in the booth, you had 2 sensor operators, and you had your EWO, your electronic weapons officer. Then you had your gun crew, so that could be 3 or 4, sometimes 5, it just depended on the mission, but primarily a 4-man gun crew. And then you had a load master. And the load master during the mission would lay in the bubble, lay in the tail of the aircraft where there was a bubble, and he watched our 6. So he laid there on his stomach with night vision goggles, because then we only flew at night, calling out any threats from our 6 o'clock. Because during the mission, our focus is off the left-hand side of the aircraft. Some of us are looking at our sensors, and they're talking on the radios. We also used one of our gunners to be our right scanner. We had a left scanner, right scanner, but our right scanner, because if you can imagine the gunship in a left-hand circle, all the attention is focused on that side. You needed somebody to check our 6, but then also look out the right side of the aircraft for things that we weren't paying attention to.
Now, you just touched on it briefly about your job, your specific job aboard the AC-130. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so as the navigator on board the AC-130H, my position on the aircraft is seated on the flight deck. So the gunships, the versions of the gunship have changed over time. And in 2001, we had 2 versions. And the version that I flew on, the H model, compared to the U model gunship, I'm on the flight deck. So a little bit of a different setup. You have the pilot, the co-pilot, the engineer, the navigator, and the fire control officer. And my job as the navigator is, of course, to tell the pilots where to go. But besides route planning and figuring out how we were going to get from our takeoff base to the target area or to the air refueling track, was also all the tactical communications. So you have basic crew responsibilities, takeoff, en route, on target, and then once you get on target, you transition to the tactical mindset. So I am responsible for establishing communications from the air to the ground, but then also some of the airborne assets that might be assigned to that mission. Helicopters, maybe some fighter aircraft. I could also be responsible for some of those communications. So once you establish contact as the nav, now you're working in concert with the fire control officer and the sensor operators. If you think of it as a 4-man intimate team of finding the friendlies, finding the enemy, and then positively identifying them, and then beginning the cadence or the steps, the checklist steps to engage the enemy if required.
September 11th, 2001.
Yeah.
Take me through what that day was like for you.
So on September 11th, my husband, so I have to prelude this, my husband Ryan served just about 24 years in the Air Force. And he had a separation of service during that time. And on September 11th, we had driven up from Hurlburt Field, because I was already assigned to AFSOC. We had driven up to Maxwell Air Force Base, and I was getting ready to swear him back in on active duty. We were seated in the military and processing station, the MEP station. We were seated in just an area with a bunch of young kids. He'd been in, he had already served almost 7 years. He separated from service, became a reservist for a period of time, and then was coming back on active duty. And we watched the second airplane hit the towers live on the TV that was in the room. And I'm from New York. And we'd heard about the first airplane, and I thought, okay, puddle jumper, probably what a lot of other people thought. Puddle jumper, oh, it's gotta be crummy weather, right? I grew up on Long Island. I was familiar with the airports. I was familiar with the terrain. I'm like, there's no way it just accidentally, but maybe, right? And then when the TV came on and I saw the second airplane hit, it was clear as day. My stomach dropped, and you think about the people. You wonder who is directly impacted in my family or not, and friends, and everything shut down. So they didn't send anybody anywhere that day. We didn't have cell phones back then. We had beepers. We had beepers, pagers, and our unit was recalled. So our squadron at Hurlburt was everybody needed to come into work. So I was at about a 3-hour drive. So my husband Ryan wasn't going to be re-enlisting that day. They were shutting everything down, and I needed to go home. So we drove back, and I went to the unit. And my husband actually went back up the next day. And then he didn't need to go to basic training again, so he didn't need to be flown anywhere. So he enlisted, and then he came back to Hurlburt Field as a SERE specialist. So he was a SERE specialist his entire career. So what was the feeling? A feeling, it was quiet because nobody was flying. It was Osama bin Laden, Afghanistan. Where's Afghanistan exactly, right? And that's crazy now. We all know exactly where it is in the world. Where's Uzbekistan and these countries surrounding it? We had to look it up. How would we get there? What would our response be? And this sense of, how dare they? How dare they? And it became so important for us to begin planning. We didn't know what that was gonna look like. We just, I was young in the unit. I'd been in the unit for a little over a year. We just knew we were gonna be doing something. We were gonna get ourselves over there. That was the sense in the unit. What can we do? Where would we go? Where would we base at? And then it became out of our control, what country was gonna allow us to be based out of their country to then be a part of the response. So it was lean in, let's plan, what would we need, what equipment would we need, where's our ammunition storage, where could we work, and how do we get in the fight? How do we go there and make sure that that never happens again? So I was, as a lieutenant in the squadron at the time, I worked in our plan shop. So I was in the throes of figuring out how we would get our airplanes across the Atlantic Ocean. Where would we get gas? Are we gonna air refuel mid-air across the Atlantic? Are we gonna land somewhere? What's the weather? Our diplomatic clearances? So I was neck deep in all of that, and no place I would rather be. So that was really the spirit of what was happening. A lot of uncertainty. Well, if we go, are we coming back? When are we coming back? But nobody cared. Like we just wanted to be a part of it. We got to where we were going across the pond, and we were going to go and stage and get as close to the fight as we could, waiting for the government to sort out what base we were going to work out of. So in the squadron at the time, they built 4 crews, and we brought 4 airplanes across the Atlantic, and I was part of one of the crews, and I was excited. So we took 4 airplanes across the pond, across the Atlantic, and we went to Suda Bay, Greece, and we sat there waiting for our government to figure out where we were going to base out of.
Out of those 4 aircraft that went over and the crews involved, how many were women?
I was the first female navigator assigned to the 16th Special Operations Squadron. And I didn't know that until somebody pointed it out once I was in the unit. They're like, hey, did you know we haven't had a girl? I'm like, no, I didn't know. Because I just wanted to be a part of the mission. I think in SERE, there were very few women too. We had a couple, but very few. And I think I saw what right looked like. I saw that if you were good at your job, it didn't matter. So I was the first navigator. We had a female co-pilot and a female loadmaster. So there were 3 of those first 4 crews that went over. We had 3 women on different, we weren't all on the same crew. We were all on different crews. So we were sitting in Greece, and we got the call that we're gonna bring the airplanes to Karshi-Khanabad, K2 Uzbekistan, which is a country to the north of Afghanistan. That was the forward operating base, that's where we were going. We landed, and that next morning, we got our mission. So we were there for a very short period of time. We got called into the operations tent, and in 2001, the level of printing out products and information that you could digitally upload just didn't exist. I pulled out my little green notebook. We were given a call sign, a frequency, and a grid, so the location of our friendly forces. And the chaplain came in to the tent and prayed for warmth, because the gunship wasn't sealed and the cold air would come whipping through that aircraft. And it was it was November in Afghanistan over the mountains. And the lawyers came in and gave us the rules of engagement. Don't shoot women and children, don't shoot mosques, we'll sort the rest out later. And we knew what we were there to do. We were there to find our friendly forces and protect them and eliminate the enemy. And we wrote all that down. I opened up my charts, I pulled them out of boxes and taped them together to come up with a plan from where we were to where we were going. Came up with a route. It was about a 30-minute flight from K2 to the border of Afghanistan near Mazar-Sharif. Termez was kind of that area that we were crossing at the time. And we had to sight in our weapons. We had to tweak the guns. So I looked at the chart and found some sand dunes that said sand dunes. So we went to that area and scanned it to make sure there were no people in the area. And we sighted in our weapons. And then we proceeded to the grid of our friendly forces. And those friendly forces were Operational Detachment 595, our ODA, the Northern Alliance, co-located with General Dostum, otherwise known as the Horse Soldiers. So that first combat mission, we arrive in the vicinity of the city of Kunduz, just to the east of Mazar, and made contact. That's my job, right? Point A to point B. We get there, and I establish communications with the team. And I'd mentioned that I forget a lot of things, but I'll never forget this mission. It was my first combat mission ever, and it was one that gave me the moniker, the Angel of Death. So we make contact with the team, and they ask us to look for any enemy personnel or enemy vehicles. And in November of 2001, Afghanistan was dark. Nobody was out at night. The lights in the country were out. And any movement was pretty easily identifiable. We flew only at night as well. There was the uncertainty of what threats do they have, what ground-to-air threats. So we were on edge. You're ready and you fall back to your training, but we were paying attention to every little detail. So we found some armor in the vicinity of Kunduz that we were cleared to engage, and we did. We engaged that. There were no people around. They were kind of parked in a parking lot area, if you will, or dirt area. And the team called on the radio and they said, hey, we see some lights coming our way. Can you take a look? So if you can imagine, on the gunship, we're looking through a soda straw through our sensors, and you can't see everything. So we run out this road towards their location. Their location was off to the west of the city. So they were in a secure spot. As far as we could tell at the time. So we see some lights, and it's a vehicle with their lights on driving towards their location. And I give the play-by-play. My job as the tactical communicator is to paint the picture because they can't see. So through clear, concise communication, I need to tell them what's going on. What's the distance of the vehicle to their location? What does it look like? Where do we think they're going? What does the road ahead look like? And during that discussion, that back and forth, they cleared us to engage that vehicle. Just when we were going through our final checks inside the aircraft, ready to engage, it pulled into a compound in the middle of nowhere. So we held off. It was our decision on board the aircraft. I went back out on the radio and I said, hey, this vehicle just pulled into this small compound. Multiple vehicles, multiple adult males outside in this courtyard. And he said, stand by, and he came back over the radio and said, there's a confirmed Taliban, you're cleared hot. So I can remember that moment, as I'm sitting in the aircraft. I look to my right, it's Lieutenant Colonel Mike Radford. He's the fire control officer. We're at this station. And I was like, game on. Like, this is it. The sense of payback, the sense of all of the training coming to, it's not training anymore. Like, this is it in that quick instant. And it was, we were always all business, but it was business. So that engagement, we shot 400 rounds of 40 and 100 rounds of 105. That airplane was fully loaded before takeoff because we did not know what we were going to do, but we were going to be ready. Cans of ammunition on the floor of the aircraft that the gunners were loading that night. We shot the vehicle. There was a vehicle parked right in the entrance of that building, and when we hit that vehicle, it caught on fire and hundreds of enemy personnel poured out of that building. We conserved our ammunition because they would scatter and then they would group up. And they would scatter and they would group up. So once we saw that pattern, we would wait, and knowing that they were enemy personnel and needed to be removed. During that, I was responsible for that, again, that ground to air connection and explaining what was happening. And it was General Dostum that heard my voice. And he looked at our American teammates and he said, is that a woman? And they were like, yeah, as a matter of fact, it is. And he's like, America is so determined to kill Taliban. They bring their women on warplanes. He just couldn't believe it. And now this story is their story. I wasn't there. Inside the airplane, we had no idea this was happening. We were focused on the mission. We were focused on eliminating as many enemy as possible because the friendlies were secure at the moment. And General Dostum got on his walkie-talkie and called the people that we were shooting. And he said, "You're so pathetic. American women are killing you." And while I was talking to the team, he keyed his mic so the enemy could hear my voice. So much for secure communications, but it was like, hey, we're gonna get you. So surrender to me now, and American women are above you. So the mission is ongoing, and when I talk about really conserving our ammunition to get max effect, we used an ISLID, a high-powered laser pointer from the airplane, and you could see under night vision goggles. So from the ground, if you had NVGs, you would see this green laser. We were using it internally to sort and track the enemy. And General Dostum had a pair of night vision goggles from our teammates, and he saw that, and he saw this green laser coupled with the explosions from our weapons, and he said, is that a death ray? He believed that laser was blowing things up, and he looked at our teammates and he said, is that a death ray? And of course, our American teammates are like, yeah, as a matter of fact, it is. So he got back on his walkie-talkie, and that is where the angel of death moniker came. Surrender to me now. The angel of death is above you. We are turning you to flames. And again, keyed the mic. So the enemy could hear my voice. So unbeknownst to us inside the gunship, we Winchestered. We shot all of our ammunition, right? 400 rounds of 40 and 100 rounds of 105. Eliminated hundreds of enemy personnel that night. We were just about at bingo fuel, just enough fuel to get us back up to Uzbekistan to K2, and we left. And the next morning, hundreds of enemy personnel turned themselves into General Dostum. A couple of weeks later, the team, ODA 595, came up to K2, walked into our ops tent and handed me an AK-47 from General Dostum and told us the story, because we didn't know. And that weapon is hung at the 16th Special Operations Squadron. Now they're located at Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico, but it's part of their heritage, part of that mission, that team that we were able to be, the thing that we were able to be a part of. We were just doing our jobs. I'll share with you that me telling that story was something that I hated when that happened. I was proud to be a part of the mission and the crew and making a difference, but I was being called out for being different. And I just wanted to be really good at my job. I didn't want to be seen as a woman. I wanted to be seen as a good teammate, as a good crewman. And it was the unintended impact that has allowed me to embrace the story. And the unintended impact is General Dostum took the story of American women on warplanes, and he went to a burqa unveiling ceremony, a village of Afghan women and children in 2001, so shortly after that mission, and he talked about America allowing their women to fly on airplanes and warplanes, and he encouraged them to fight. He's like, if you continue to fight, you will one day have those freedoms. And it was our Special Forces soldiers that shared that story with me. And then I met women from Afghanistan over the last few decades at different events that had heard that story. I met General Dostum's son in New York at Ground Zero. And when I spoke with him, he told me that he remembers his dad telling him those stories. So the freedoms and the opportunity that our country has, and that my opportunity to be a part of a crew, to be in a time and place, to make a difference, to do my job, had so much positive, unintended impact. I've embraced that over the years, and that's why I'm now comfortable sharing this story. I'm proud to be a part of all of the efforts of others to put me in places to make a difference for others. Something that's not well known is that in February of 2002, we had to bring our airplane back for maintenance. So I flew the airplane back with the crew, and I brought some brass back, some 105 brass. And I went to visit New York. And I hit up some fire stations that had been pretty hard hit in Midtown. And no pomp and circumstance. My family's still up in New York, so we went into Manhattan, and I just showed up with the brass, and I'd put a picture of the crew on there, just wrote a little something. I was like, hey, I just want to let you know, like, we're making them pay. Like, what they did to us will never happen again. And that was, that's something I'll never forget.